We're going to talk about anatomy tonight, but not the anatomy of your body. We're going to talk about the anatomy of your spirit. And that happens to be the name of the book that this wonderful author has written that we're going to discuss this evening. Her name is Carolyn Myss, and she has written a book called An Anatomy of the Spirit. She is a PhD doctor, but she keeps correcting me when I call her Dr. Myss. So I'm going to say, welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you, Corinne.
Carolyn, tell us a little bit about your background. There was an interesting description of you. They said that you were a medical intuitive. What does that mean?
But I started out normal.
When you started out normal?
I am a medical intuitive, Corinne, and what that means is I have an ability to evaluate a person's energy and in terms of their physical body as well as their energetic body and determine how healthy they are or if they are developing an illness, and if so, what it is. And this is an ability that sort of came on me suddenly. I mean, my background was that I was a journalist, and then I became a theologian. And I'm grateful for that because I think it gave me a substantial academic background as well as a reference point for this type of skill. But when this ability surfaced, it was when I was a publisher. I published books. And I don't think I would have done anything about it had it not been for the fact that I met a brain surgeon from Harvard by the name of Norm Shealy, who had an interest in studying people who were medically intuitive. So when he found out that I had that ability, he said, well, how good are you? And I said, yeah, I don't really know. And then I was thinking to myself privately, and I actually don't care because I don't want to do this. And he said, well, I'll call you sometime. And so he went back to his clinic in Springfield, Missouri, and I was living at the time in New Hampshire. And he phoned about a month later, and he asked me if I would evaluate a patient. And I'd never done anything like this at a distance. Up until this time, I would do people locally, but never long distance, and certainly not with a physician. And he said, all right, what kind of information do you need? And I said, you know, I don't know. And he said, well, let's start with a name and an age, and let's see what happens. So he did that. He gave me the name and the age of this patient, and right after that, I began to perceive information that I then translated into what I felt was happening in this person's body. As the years went by and I continued to work with him, my perception became more and more accurate, as did the range of what I could perceive. In the beginning, it was whether or not you were healthy, and if you weren't healthy, what kind of illness did you have? And I wasn't very sophisticated at it. I could pick up cancer, I could pick up the major league disorders, but you have to remember that my capacity to pick up an illness matched the vocabulary in my head. All right, if I didn't know that the disease Crohn's existed, I couldn't find it. All right. Which is
so you don't have any medical background?
No, I have no medical background, none whatsoever. So I think that that was part of the blessing in meeting Norm Shealy and in working in what I consider to be my intuitive residency with him for 6.5 years.
Now, do you walk around the street and can you just see people on the street and pick up what's wrong with them? Does that happen to you?
Oh, a lot, sure. But you have to remember that I'm not interested in doing that. So, you know, I mean, I'm asked that question continually, and I think that a lot of people assume that people with intuitive abilities are like voyeurs, if you will, always scanning the horizon. But I have no interest in doing that any more than a singer walks down the street singing.
So we don't have to worry that you know something terrible about us that you're not telling us tonight.
No. In fact, you know, I love this story. I was doing a workshop one time, and way back in the 1980s when I used to do workshops that were on a smaller scale than I do today, they were maybe 40, 50, 60 people. In those days, I would do readings on every single person in the workshop. And I did a reading on this one person. I couldn't find anything wrong with him. And I said to her, you've got a clean bill, to which she did this. She said, oh. And I said, what, are you disappointed you're healthy? But she was so desperate to be impressed, you know. And so I don't do readings anymore. I'm very glad to be able to announce that.
So people can't call you up who are watching the show and say, I want you to you take a look at me.
No, it's not possible anymore. when I started to get as many as 800 requests per month, I realized I just can't do this. You know, I just can't. I was spending all of my time on the phone explaining to people why I couldn't fit them in for another 7 to 10 months. And that wasn't fair to their health. All right, what if they were in serious trouble and decided, I'm not going to go see anybody because I'm going to have an appointment with Carolyn 8 months from now, and by the time that happens, their cancer had spread all over the place. You see, I simply can't do it anymore.
So you were forced to write a book like this.
Well, I wouldn't say forced. I just thought it was the best way to go because I'm in the business of educating people. I'm a teacher. And part of the voice of teaching can take the form of a book, and it felt better for me. You know, I mean, I trained to be a writer. I'm reclusive by nature. I can spend hours and hours and hours comfortably trying to explain what it is I do and then how to make it work for you. And the book accommodates that as tapes do. So I think this is a much better vehicle for me at this stage in my career anyway.
So what you've really done here is teach people how to do it for themselves.
Well, let's be sure we understand what the it is.
Okay.
Not to be medically intuitive,
But
to be
to be healing.
self-intuitive. Right.
To heal themselves.
Let me be real clear about this.
Okay.
What I've taught people how to do, what I hope to teach them through that book, is how to become aware of their body and their physical anatomy as well as their energetic anatomy. And in doing that, to begin to develop a sensitivity so that they can sense when they're losing power, and to recognize that that's the first stage of the body saying, hey, if you don't reverse this energy current, we're going to have a catastrophe in this cell tissue.
All right, this is a very important point, that you say that bodies are made of energy.
Correct.
And that one of the problems that we have in illness or feeling well in general is whether or not we are taking care of our own energy or not.
Yes.
You know, I was at a little talk that you gave, and you were talking about how you gave such an interesting example about how God gives us $100 every day.
Yeah.
I want you to tell that
Sure.
because it made such an impression on me.
All right. Well, you know, there's so many ways to explain things, and I like a real earthy, grounded presentation. And the best way I've found to make the point is this: if God gave you a budget of $100 worth of energy a day, your job is to learn to become a responsible investor. Now, you can invest that energy in your past, which means if you do invest it in the past, there's a real good chance you're investing it in sad memories that you want to keep alive versus investing it in your present time life. And if you invest it in your past, you're going to get dividends from your history, and those types of dividends come from wounds. So if you're investing it in a bad memory, I've had a traumatic childhood, I have a broken heart, I have a marriage I can't get over, I have a divorce I can't get over, then the only kind of energy that you're going to have come back to you, i.e. dividends, is going to be a repeat of that trauma. And you're going to see that trauma again and again, and every day, the way a dividend pays off is every day you'll see something that reminds you of that trauma. Versus, if you were to take that $100 and say, you know, I think I've invested enough in that period of my life, it hasn't paid off the way I wanted it, write off your loss, mourn it, and continue going. Then take that money and invest it in something creative today. And if you do, the same kind of principle will play out, which is you'll see a reminder of that investment every day. You'll meet somebody who happens to be interested in the same thing. You'll suddenly walk down the street and you'll see something that says, you know, that'll apply to the idea that I'm working on. You'll have a dividend a day.
So you're supposed to spend the $100 on yourself in the present.
You're supposed to spend the $100 on the present time. On present time. Be here now, as they say. Even if you want to use the scripture, even Jesus said, leave the dead alone and get on with your life.
But so much of our lives have been tainted by so many sad things.
That's right.
You know,
That's
many
right.
of the people in this audience are walking around with a broken heart.
That's right. That's absolutely right. A disappointed life, a broken heart.
A loss of someone.
Yep,
that we're,
that's exactly right.
how do you get over that so that you can live in the present?
You know, Corinne, I'm not sure that we can get over a lot of those things. But what we can do is make living with them more comfortable. All right? And I believe that one of the most healing acts we can do with ourselves is to mourn those experiences, give them a fair period of mourning for yourself. And then, eventually, I think inevitably, our spiritual and physical and biological design, if you will, automatically tries to shed the grief because it recognizes that past a certain point, grief becomes toxin. And the body will help you try and release it. At that point, you turn the memory into a companion and recognize, okay, this situation didn't work out the way I wanted to, and now I have to pray to live with that. Now I have to move to acceptance and to cease asking the question, why did this happen as it did? And to stop telling yourself, if I only knew the reason, I could get on with my life, because guess what? There's a real good chance you'll never find out the reason, especially if you make the bargain with yourself that says, I'm not living anymore until I know why this happened. And life will say to you, well, then we're not playing. You stay where you are, and we'll stay where you are. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. You have to be able to say to yourself, I don't like what happened. I wish it hadn't happened, but it did.
And I may never know why.
And I may never know why. But the thing that keeps grief alive the most is actually not the incident, but the need to know why it happened.
That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Or
that, in other words, that keeps the broken heart broken.
Who's to blame?
Or well, I need to know why this happened. That's just another form of who's to blame.
Or could I have done something different?
That's right. That's just another form of that. Because by asking, could I have done something different, you need to know why it happened. And then you could evaluate what you did. It's all another version of that same question. If I only knew why it happened, then I would know how I factored into it, then I would know who's to blame, I would know all those mysteries would be solved, and then I could get on with my life. But that's not the way life is. Life does not give us those answers on demand. We have to choose to move on, and then we may or may not get those answers, but ultimately, if we choose to move on, the pain that we're carrying begins to diminish day by day until you realize it's kind of like daylight savings time, in the sense of, you know, when we reach a solstice point, we begin to start moving the other way, and you don't realize that we're gaining a minute worth of light per day, and all of a sudden you notice. So it's quite the same thing, where all of a sudden you're not thinking quite as much about the trauma today as you did yesterday. And pretty soon you realize, I haven't thought about it all afternoon. And then pretty soon you realize, quite frankly, it's once a month. And then pretty soon you realize, I'm hardly thinking about it.
And then you start feeling guilty that you're not thinking about it.
Yeah, then you go through the guilt phase.
Yeah.
Which is,
how can I get over something like that?
It's like, how do you, it's sort of like resurrecting sorrow, but you got over it.
But you said something about giving yourself the time. Are you talking that we should set time limits on certain?
Absolutely. Doesn't that sound outrageous? I remember hearing the most delicious story about the way certain Native American traditions handle mourning. And that's that they'll gather 3 times to hear your story, and the 4th time they turn their back because it doesn't help you anymore. Right? And have you heard the story I tell about David Paladin?
No.
May I share
the
story?
Well, there's a lot of people out there who haven't heard the story.
Well, this is a dearly true story, a remarkably true story, if you will. I knew this man, sadly, for a very brief period of time. He was a Navajo Indian, and he left his reservation when he was about 14 years old. He was an alcoholic, and he left with a friend, and they lied about their age. They got into the merchant marines, and they were, scooting around the South Pacific, and they found another boy who had run away from home, only he ran away from Germany. So these 3 kids were palling around with each other. David was an artist. His Indian name is Chet LaHaye. And while he was traveling the South Seas, he would sketch what he saw, and what he saw were the Japanese preparing for World War II, building their bunkers. His drawings were eventually turned into the officers in the military, and David was drafted, and he assumed he would become an artist for the military. But in fact, because he spoke fluent Navajo, he had to go to Europe where they used decoders. And he spoke Navajo, and of course the Nazis thought it was a code, but that they couldn't interpret it. He was captured. He was sent to Dachau, and one of the things, isn't that interesting? Because that was certainly not for soldiers.
No.
One of the things that happened is they nailed his feet to the floor and made him stand there, okay? Several other things happened, quite horrible, and then they shipped him back. He was scheduled to be sent to the gas chamber, and at this point they were putting him on a cattle car to take him someplace, and there was a German soldier sticking his gun into the side, screaming for him to get going, and it turned out that was the kid he'd been traveling with in the South Seas. That young man got David out of there, and David survived the war, obviously. And in fact, this kid somehow, this soldier, somehow or other maneuvered him and got him back to a regular prisoner of war camp for soldiers. When the camps were liberated, David was sent back to the United States, where he spent 2.5 years in and out of a coma in a veterans hospital. When he finally came out of it, you can imagine the mess he was in, and his legs were useless. So he had to wear heavy braces and crutches, and he decided to return to his reservation and see his people again, and then he was committed to living the rest of his life in a veterans hospital. Well, you have to appreciate they hadn't seen him now for maybe 12 years, and he comes back dragging his legs, filled with horror stories. So they gathered together to hear his story, and he told them everything that had happened to him and all that he had endured. And then they said that they held council to try and figure out how to help him, and this is what they did. They tied a rope around his waist, and they pulled the braces off of his legs, and they threw him into very deep water. And they said, David, swim or drown, because no one can live without a spirit. Call your spirit back, and if you can't do that, we have to let you go. Well, David said he had to decide in that water whether or not to die or to forgive. And in order to forgive, he had to give up knowing why it happened to him. And he had to walk through every one of those memories, including seeing the face, the spirit, if you will, of this one Nazi who would shove maggots and chicken gizzards down his throat. And he looked at that image and he said, even you I forgive. And then the image spoke to him and said, Chet LaHaye, I was trying to keep you alive. It was the only food I had. All the time, there was yet a different reason. After that, David got his legs back. He became a Christian minister, a Navajo medicine man, and an extraordinary artist. And I'm sorry to say, he passed on in 1986, but there's a book about him out called Painting the Dream.
So the point of the story is
that we have to, his family gave him a limited time to heal, regardless of how horrific.
live or drown.
Live or drown. You can't keep needing to know why things happen as they do. He had to give that up. He had to give that up. And they gave him one shot.
You talk about, in your book, you talk about people who indulge in something called woundology, where they keep up the story, you know, ad infinitum with people and groups and discussing.
Right. That's right. I think that what I recognized was that when the psychological era began in the 1960s, we developed a whole new vocabulary, a vocabulary of internal intimacy as opposed to external. Prior to the 1960s, it would be considered intimate to talk about how much money you made or what
That was very intimate.
Right, or what stocks you invested in. Now people are begging for you to ask that kind of question. That's the least thing that's considered intimate. Now what we've learned through, and by the way, in the same vein, in those days, if you were seeing a therapist, you'd keep that in the closet. Okay, that was a
That was a disgrace.
That was a disgrace. Okay, now we have reversed it so that now, if you don't have a therapist, you're not vogue. All right, and in having a therapist, what we've done is we've crossed a couple of wires. In that spirituality and therapy have somehow or other become a little bit of the same thing. And what we've also done is formed a new level of intimacy, because in this journey of discovering ourselves, we need to talk about it. And the first place you go is when you pursue, what about me? Where do I fit into my life? You're going to start with evaluating your life from where you've been hurt. And for the first time in our culture, we now have given ourselves permission to talk about that. So now we talk about it, and we reach out with each other, and we begin discussing where we've been hurt, and we discover not only does that feel real good, but we could get a lot of mileage out of it. Because if someone said to you, well, why haven't you gone on with your life? Why haven't you become the wonderful artist you wanted to, or why haven't you done whatever? You could say, I was so traumatized, and everyone says, oh my God, I understand. And much more significantly, they'll look at you and say, and it wasn't your fault. So imagine being in a position to not have to push yourself anymore and to have it acknowledged that it wasn't your fault. That feels real good, Corrine. Now, am I saying that people don't need support through healing? Absolutely not. They do, all the support they can get. But at some point, your body is done draining the wound. And if you have become addicted to the power woundology gives you, speaking wound fluently, that is as strong an addiction, in my opinion, as pills or drugs are. And I have met so many people who will openly admit. I remember meeting one person, for example, who said that she expects her friends to recognize her wounds. And if they don't honor her wounds, I said, what does that mean? She said, if I call you up and say I'm having a flashback of this, she expects them to drop what they're doing and get over to her place. And she considers anybody saying no a breach of friendship. Now, why would you give up that kind of power? You see what I'm saying?
But you don't get on with your life.
Of course you
It's
don't
an
get on with
excuse.
it. It's a very strong excuse. Or what about the way in which we meet people and we have conversations and you want to get to know somebody? And this is the way everybody does it. There isn't any exception to this. We meet somebody for the first time, and the first thing you're going to say is, well, where are you from? The next logical thing is, well, what do you do for a living? Okay, that's interesting, you know. And then the third thing you're going to say is, you're going to ask a personal question, because now you're moving more into personal territory, right? And you might say, so are you vegetarian, or are you into tofu, or what's the scoop on you? So now the point is that this information does not make for intimacy. Okay? What if you wanted to begin to form something personal with that person? You'd have to pull something deeper out of your gut. So what people use these days is they'll pull out a wound, but it can't be a big wound. It's got to be something small. Because if it's a big wound, if you pull out everything at once, they're going to say, whoa, I'm out of here, right?
Yeah, right.
So they could do something small. So you'll say something like this. You'll say, you know, days like this, they remind me of my childhood, and I never got enough chocolate milk. And you'll look like you're interested, but if you want to bond with this person, you'll think, okay, give me a milk-sized wound, nothing too big. And out of your mouth will come, you never got chocolate milk? I never got vanilla ice cream. And then, boom, the wound language begins. And what happens is you become wound mates. Now, if this happens between a couple who can potentially be romantically attracted to each other, then what you've just said is the basis of this relationship is the intimacy of our wounds. And if that happens, why would you be interested in healing? If it meant potentially, if I heal before my wound mate, what if he doesn't want to come with me? I've just lost the relationship. So now you have a lot invested. In fact, you've invested your entire relationship on staying wounded together, not healthy, but wounded. And you'll start going to healing seminars as a sort of a unified healing attempt, but the fact is you'll find some way to keep it at a distance, to find fault with the healing offered you, because you know unconsciously, if not consciously, that if you don't heal at exactly the same pace, there's a real good chance that, in fact, if you do heal, your need for each other will no longer be there.
So you continue to be a workshop junkie.
You continue to be a wound junkie as well as a workshop
And a healing
shop
junkie.
A healing junkie, right. Because you found a lot of benefits in being wounded. But again, I want to emphasize that genuine healing does require a period of therapy. It does require what I call the witness phase, where you have the support of friends and a group. But at some point, you've got to recognize, I've gotten all the support I can. The only thing that can heal me now is me getting on with my life.
And it's making a decision
Yeah, the decision to get on with your life.
to put it behind you.
Yeah, and to let
It's
go.
giving up hope.
It's not giving up hope.
It's giving up hope of ever finding out why.
It's giving up the need to know why things happen as they do. And to stop looking backwards in your life and investing, back to that $100, investing your energy in yourself and in your tomorrow and into building a healthy tomorrow instead of keeping a sad yesterday alive.
Carolyn, you talk a great deal in your book about self-esteem. As a matter of fact, you have one very wonderful long chapter called Personal Power.
Yes.
And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about self-esteem. How do we get self-esteem?
Well, you know, the first point I'd like to make is nobody's born with it, right? Nobody is born feeling good about themselves, to the best of my observation. I think that that is what I would call your family's duty or obligation to you, is to teach you to love and respect yourself as well as everybody else around you. But self-esteem, I became interested in it when I started to teach workshops on intuition, because I never realized how strong the connection was between self-esteem and intuition. When people would say to me, what do I need to develop to become intuitive? I started out by thinking I had to come up with some kind of meditation, some kind of diet, something, you know, psychic cat food, anything, right? And then I recognized that in fact they were so intuitive it was driving them nuts, that in fact everybody is. But the drawback was that they didn't have enough self-esteem to follow their intuitive hunches. They didn't have enough regard for themselves, enough sense of their own strength to follow what their gut instinct was saying to them. Now, how do you get that? Obviously, Corrine, this is not a product that can be bought. This is not really a product that I don't believe that you can get self-esteem by meditation. I think meditation can help you perhaps get in contact with the courage you need to actually make changes that reflect your faith in yourself. Theory does not heal. Action does.
So where do you start? I mean, most of us have been told from the time we were small, don't be selfish, think of other people. And the very last thing we think about is ourselves.
That's very often the case. That's exactly right. And in order to develop self-esteem, you are going to go through a phase, and a very necessary phase, of becoming narcissistic, right? You have to do that, as outrageous as that sounds, because when you decide, I've got to develop a sense of myself, I've got to develop a sense of courage, you're going to find some way to suddenly start acting differently than the people who know you know about you.
I mean, you're to become self-indulgent. That's one way to get self-esteem.
You can. You can take self-indulgence as a route. You can become obsessed by exercise. You can become obsessed with be suddenly deciding to live your life differently. You can decide, I need to go back to school. You can be, there are many, many things that qualify by what I'd call the group mind as being self-indulgent. Anything that takes you out of the role of the server to the group will be looked upon as self-indulgent, right?
I had a girlfriend who said to me one time that she decided to take care of herself. She threw all her underwear out. And she went to a department store and she bought very luxurious underwear.
Delicious,
She
yeah.
said everybody saw the good things that I had on the outside. If they ever saw what my underwear looked like, they would be shocked. And that was her first
You mean good
act.
by conservative things on the outside?
No,
If it's-
she meant that she looked very good on the outside, but she had underpants that had holes in them, you know.
Oh, right, very
You know,
good.
ratty-looking
Right,
bras
right,
and
right,
you know, things that we all have in our drawers that we're saving for God knows what.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and that was one way I thought it was kind of crazy, but
No, you understand, Corinne, you touch a very significant point. I mean, you don't realize how significant. And that's the illusion that in order to change something about ourselves, we have to do something big, right? We don't. In fact, it's this, you don't realize that, let me say this differently. Let me go about this through a different door. We are very accustomed to thinking that we have only 5 senses, sight, sound, etc., and that that which exists that we cannot see is therefore not real. And from our 5 senses, we've developed a scale of what's powerful and what's not. Back to the subject of power. And we've decided that the bigger something is, the more powerful it is. The smaller it is, it has no power whatsoever. And if it's subtle, throw it out. That doesn't count at all. So when you say to somebody, oh yeah, well the most powerful thing you can do is something small that you can hardly see. And you know why? It doesn't scare you. What's the significance of that? You won't sabotage the change. You'll let it happen. I remember this incredible story of this man who was ridiculously wealthy, one of those gargantuan multimillionaires. Now his 40th birthday comes around. And he thought to himself, what could he give himself for his 40th birthday? There was essentially nothing he needed, but he looked at himself in the mirror and he realized that he'd fallen apart at the seams. While he had acquired everything he needed, he hadn't cared for himself. So for a 40th birthday present, he decided to take up jogging. And his first experience with jogging, he could barely go 3 blocks because he was so ridiculously out of shape, and he smoked. So by 8 p.m. that night, he gave up smoking, because if he figured, rather, that if he was going to keep his promise to himself, that he was going to jog, he had to quit smoking. All right, now, this all started from this very tiny choice, allegedly tiny choice, of running. Well, the next thing you know, he begins to get in shape. And as he got more and more in shape, he became more and more conscious of, guess what? His nutrition. So the next thing you know, he's becoming a health fanatic. And by the time he finished this transition, which began with just, I think I'm going to start running, he had become a health entrepreneur and leader in the holistic health field. If someone had said to him, you know what you're going to do? You're going to leave behind this incredible corporate powerhouse you have, and why don't you just jump right into that job as a health entrepreneur and sponsoring all of these health programs, he would have laughed at you, and he would have walked out of the room thinking you were one of God's original fools. But because it came in so softly, he never saw the huge world that was attached to this. Huh?
you know, one of the things you say that in order to get self-esteem, that there are stages of it, and the first thing is revolution. So was that his
course.
revolution?
That was his revolution. It was exactly his revolution. And when most people decide, I've got to get to know myself, I've got to, they have to, they stage a revolution against what doesn't work anymore, generally long before they know what will work. So the first stage is you stage a revolt saying, I can't take this anymore, no matter what the this is. Now that's a very powerful stage of birthing self-esteem, because the I that screams no more is very different than the I that says, I'm warning you. When you actually get past the warning stage, you're birthing a whole different, and you get into the action stage, you're birthing a whole different kind of self. So now you've engaged in your revolution, whatever it is.
So the revolution could be something big. It could
Yeah.
be, I'm leaving this man.
Absolutely. It can mean a divorce.
I don't want this job.
That's right. Absolutely.
I will not wait on my kids anymore.
That's right. It can be any of that.
I will no longer
Go to church.
go to church.
Right. It can be any of that. I will no longer support this type of organization or whatever it is. The size, I emphasize again and again, the illusion is that what you need to do has to be big. Your biggest obstacle to change is believing that. You do something small, it is the symbolic act of changing that has the power. It's the willingness to make the change that carries the power of birthing self-esteem, not the size of the change you made. Did that make sense to you?
It does. And one of the things that fascinates me about these changes is sometimes it takes the slightest trigger.
Yeah.
You know, you've put up with something for years, and one day, you know, somebody looks at you cross-eyed and you said, I'm never going to see him again. I mean, some small trigger can sometimes start this revolution.
That's right, absolutely. And you think it starts it. It's sort of like that, how did that expression go? When I saw this one reporter interview an entertainer recently who had become very successful, and he said to this entertainer, how long did it take you to become an overnight success? He said 20 years.
20
okay,
years, that's
but it's the same sort of thing. You accumulate and accumulate your data, and when you change, it is the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back, but you've already built your camel. You acquired the camel, shall we say. So it is always the smallest thing, because you just can't take it.
The narcissism is then very important, because once you have gotten rid of whatever that you have rebelled against, you have to take care of yourself now, because you're a worthy person.
Well, you know, the first after the revolution, the next natural stage is involution. Before you enter narcissism, you got to figure out, now that I know what I don't want to deal with anymore, what do I want to deal with? So you have to go into a stage of self-discovery, involution. You know, if I don't want to be this kind of religion, what do I want? If I don't want to be with that kind of person, who am I and what do I need now? You will go through a necessary phase of involution. And let's say you decide, I want to wear my hair this way. I want to be a zany redhead. I want to get the most outrageous clothes I have ever seen. I want to become a totally liberated person. Now, let's say you came from a very conservative family, and now you're shopping at a leather goods store, and you're buying all kinds of funsy-wunsy clothes, right? And you get all dressed up, and you walk in and you announce, hi, and your family rolls over into a dead faint and screams. You get that off. What's become of you? If you don't think you need to be narcissistic to withstand that type of onslaught, think again. You need every ounce of narcissism. You need to grit your teeth and say, and recognize that your family's trying to say, you're changing, you come back here. If you change too fast, you won't be one of us. But they don't speak that way. They speak in aggressive criticism. And in order to withstand that, two things help. One, becoming ridiculously narcissistic, and equally compassionate toward your family.
To your family.
And recognizing that their criticism is actually a form of saying, my God, we're going to miss you.
Yeah.
You're not like us anymore. Because what you're essentially saying is, look how much I've changed. I'm nothing like you. Aren't you glad? I certainly am. You know, what do you think they're going to do? Look at you and say, thank God you've gotten out alive. We're still here, but you're on the road. No. They're going to say, you come back here.
Misery likes company.
Right. They're going to, no. Love likes company, Corrine.
Yeah.
It's more like you're one of us. You've liked the same things we've liked all this time. And now you're saying you want to pursue a different level of yourself. Think of it this way. We start off as toilet water, then we become perfume, and then we become cologne, and then we become perfume. And when you emerge into the cologne state, you no longer hang out with toilet water. It just doesn't fit. And the toilet water is going to miss you. All right? It's not misery loves company. It's just the natural stage of evolution. So after the narcissistic stage, then you don't need that kind of tough defensive ego. Then you enter the fourth stage, which is evolution. You simply grow.
This trigger, something that happens, do you think this comes from God? Is it intuition? What
Well, no,
causes?
Intuition, nothing comes from intuition, right? In that sense. Do the trigger points come from God? Absolutely. Absolutely. And intuition is your form of recognizing, I've just had a hit. I'm getting information. Intuition is the means through which you recognize you've just gotten a message.
But a lot of people feel that intuition means that you've got to know what's happening in the future.
That's right. They have a total misconception of what intuition is.
Like they know what kind of stocks they're going to buy because
Yeah.
they have an intuition about what's
Yeah.
going to go up.
They think it's a crystal ball capacity to see the future. And you know why they want it? So that they have a guarantee that they can make choices in which they will not lose a cent of money, and they'll end up in a romantic relationship and a ridiculously active sexual connection at the end of the choices I make. But that's not intuition at all. That is not it at all. That's intuition is that sense that says, I need to pray more deeply. I need to find time for myself. This isn't the way I want to create anymore. This is the way I want to create. It's a deeper sense about oneself. It's, you know what? In deeply spiritual intuition is to healing. How do I want to say that? When I talk about woundology, I put it in the same category as street psychics. Okay? People who suck you in and tell you, Corinne, you don't go to a psychic because your life is working and you feel good.
No.
How bright do you have to be to recognize if I'm playing the role of the street psychic and somebody's sitting opposite me, I only have a few possibilities. You're either not feeling well, or you're looking for a mate, or you're wondering where your money is. That's it.
That's it.
What else is there?
What else do you ask
now,
a
do
psychic
you really
about?
think it takes a psychic to do something like that? It takes I won't say it, okay? It takes So, a clear intuitive and clear intuition comes from a very different level. A very different level. Let me compare this, that the kind of street psychic I'm talking about would be like eating junk fried food all of your life versus organically grown, healthy, consciously prepared, beautiful meals. Got it? And in order to get to that clear level of intuition, you don't get there through oming and eyeing and shoving incense up your nose. You get there by becoming by filling in your self-esteem, by beginning to realize that here's what is true. You won't become clearly intuitive if you don't have the capacity or the courage to follow your small intuitive hits. If you can't follow that, you sure aren't going to get a big one.
How do you know when it's truly intuition and not wishful thinking or not, imagination?
Yeah. Well, you know what? Because intuition makes you feel uncomfortable. Fantasy doesn't.
Oh, wow. Now you've got to say that again. Intuition makes you feel uncomfortable.
Fantasy doesn't.
Now, I should think if you got this idea and you felt very uncomfortable, that would be a signal from the body that says, don't do that.
No. It's not that kind of discomfort, okay? It's that kind of funky feeling that says...
Scary feeling.
It can be scary, it can be uncomfortable, just like when it comes in its positive form. You meet somebody and you think, I've got to get to know that person. You don't know why. But you just have this strong feeling that actually comes, it's trans-selfish. Right? It's that feeling of private agenda. And somehow or other, with clear intuition, comes a package of courage that you don't get with fantasy.
So when you get this trigger, this little thing that makes you want to change and take care of yourself and honor your own self, you get the strength to do it.
That's right. You actually do. And you know what? this package of strength that you get is like a little battery that gets plugged into your solar plexus, gets plugged into your gut. And it begins to boom, 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 throb constantly. It's relentless. And it gets louder at night. You can count on it. Intuition becomes absolutely obnoxious at night, all right? Until you start doing something about it. And when you start following it, then you begin to experience the phenomenon of synchronicity. Whereas, if it's a manufactured fantasy, you don't get that kind of help. You absolutely don't get that kind of help.
You get closed doors.
Yeah, you get closed doors, or yeah, you get that, you know. And I think aside from this very small percentage of people in our culture who literally qualify for the term psychopath or sociopath or schizophrenic, who manufacture voices, if you will, and are absolutely convinced they're real, you have to go some to fool your own gut instincts. You know, it's not that easy to do. So when if you've done something wrong, and your whole system knows it, try to silence that voice. It will not leave you alone. Right?
No, you keep worrying about it.
That's right. All right. It's that kind of voice. Intuition has that kind of authority, shall we say. Fantasy doesn't.
And the way it's going to be manifested in your life, the most effective way, is to keep in the present. In other words, you don't get intuition about your entire life, you get intuition about what to do right now.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Now think of how many times, let's tie this to healing. Think of how many times people are reminded, I certainly see this because I work with people like this all the time, that people are reminded to forgive and let go. You know, when people are holding on to grudges or can't think kindly of somebody, think of how many times you're reminded, will you get on with it and let this go? If you really paid attention, it would be all the time. Every time you turn on this TV, you'd observe a talk show where people were talking about it, or it would be everywhere. And let's imagine that you just didn't do something about that. All of your wonderful energy for your life would be going backwards into this area, and you would not have any energy to run your here and now. Now, what intuition generally does is it's a form of guidance for tomorrow and for today, to make the right choices today so that your tomorrow plays out the way it should. Now, if you're investing all your money in keeping tomorrow alive, and you need at least $50 for tomorrow's choice, and all you've got is 50 cents, you can't get a clear intuitive hit because you're unable to act on it. You enter fog. You enter chaos. And it's a healing chaos. It's a protective chaos because you're not able to move forward anyway until you let go of the past. So all your intuition will be telling you is, let go of the past, because without doing that, I cannot give you a clear choice about tomorrow because you don't have the energy nor the focus to act on it.
So when you're praying and praying and praying and praying and nothing happens, it's because it's just not time.
Now, hold it. What do you mean by nothing happens?
I mean, nothing is being resolved that you're praying about.
Ha. The prayers are always answered, but you just don't like the way they come, okay? So when you're praying about, come on, God, help me get on with your life, the way that prayer is often answered is, all right, I'll make you so miserable about your past that you finally decide you have to surrender, let go. That's how you're going to get that prayer answered. You're not going to get that prayer answered by a sudden apparition by a therapeutically skilled angel who says, I've come to explain why those bad, terrible things have happened to you, and then I'm going to offer you 3 possible futures, and you get to pick any one you want. Oh,
And
snap
just
out of it.
rub this little lamp.
Yeah, come on. We'd all love that, but hey, that's not what goes on this planet.
What goes on is that sometimes prayers are answered to give us more pain.
No, Corrine. Not sometimes prayers are answered. All times prayers are answered, and sometimes that answer takes us into more pain in order to heal.
You know, at the very end of it, the
What
guidance, the intuition is coming from a very high source.
That's right.
It's coming from our Creator by whatever name that you would like to call this force. Is this Creator really interested in us? Does it really watch over us?
What a rich question. I'm going to take the position, years ago, well, not that long, but just say recently, you know, when I was younger, I had the more of a notion that that God believed, was more distant, shall we say, more impersonal. Now I think that every single thing we do, every single thing we say, everything, Corrine, is noted. Noted, and everything. That there isn't, that you come home one night and you fix yourself a cup of tea, you put your feet back, and you just go and you start reading a book, that when the time comes for you to go through your life review, after we die, you're going to see that moment. And you're going to see the quality of thought you released into the universe during that very quiet moment. If it was a thought of gratitude for, thank you, God, for this great day. Or if it was a negative thought that starts complaining, you're held responsible for that. I deeply believe this. Or you're rewarded for it. And again and again and again, I see more proof by virtue of coincidences or near-death experiences that tell me that this is probably so.
So we can trust these intuitive feelings,
Absolutely.
these directions.
You can trust these things. One, every prayer is heard. The answer may not come in the way you want. It generally doesn't. So don't expect the answer to come through the window you're praying through.
God knows his own business.
Right, yeah. Two, generally, prayer takes, just let it go. Just decide, look, you heard me, and that's it. And then keep praying, God, give me faith. God, give me faith. And three, when you get an intuitive hunch, and usually intuitive hunches will direct you to take the most outrageous path in your life, take it.
Take the risk.
Take the risk.
Well, I'll tell you, it's no risk for anyone to read your wonderful book,
That was sweet.
Anatomy of the Spirit.
Thank
We
you.
only touched the very smallest part of it. It's so brilliant.
Thank you, Corrine. Thank you so much.
Carolyn, it is wonderful, and it's such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Like I always tell you, we give you only miracles around here when we bring you Dr. Carolyn Myss and her wonderful book, Anatomy of the Spirit. So keep looking for us and looking for the miracles in your life, and keep coming back.